everywhere. GBS.
Good evening and welcome to the Insight Tonight. My name is Eugene Kwach, and of course tonight we navigate through the intricacies of the committee's proposal, that is the National Dialogue Committee, seeking to understand the impact that this report, this comprehensive and pivotal report, has on Kenyans. And of course, as we do this, we also delve deeply and give a comprehensive understanding of the current state of affairs. And I'm not doing this alone. I have my guest tonight, George Ngaira. Thank you so much for joining us for this great conversation.
Thank you very much, Coach, for having me again.
Okay.
Pleasure.
Tuda Bwanda before is our SMS line at Dr. Kwach at GBS TV Africa. You get to indulge us in a conversation that, of course, is around the National Dialogue Committee. Of course, there are a lot of debates around the National Dialogue Committee's report.
Yes.
But first of all, let us start with this question. Are you satisfied with the recommendations in the report? And what are this report? What is entailed in this report so that you can elucidate some of them to the public?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kwacha. Like any other Kenyan, it's of interest for me and many other Kenyans around to be able to see what would be the outcome of this dialogue report. Remember, it's a public process that has been funded by taxpayers' money, of course, with political interest from both government players and the opposition players. And there's some of the issues that actually drove us into this. There are some of the issues that came out of the public outcry that drove us into this particular dialogue. And both the Kenyans and those in the political space and also those in private sector have expectations on what can come out of this process. So as a person who's looking at what are some of the things that are key that are going to benefit the regular Kenyan, cost of living and the state of government, the governance structure, the structure of government, and some of the proposals. Remember, a very wide range of proposals were brought to the committee, not necessarily from the political players, but you also had members from the civil society and the Gender Commission. All of them had the issues that had been presented on that, that had been presented to that particular committee, and a process that has costed taxpayers money over 300 million shillings, in terms of allowances and the logistics. So, like any other Kenyan, we have huge expectations, and I hope that we can go through some of them because the proposals that they have settled on, we have about 5 to 10 of them, which are major ones, because they're saying they have compounded them, even though we had almost over 50 presentations through that particular process. Some of the things have not quite been captured, and except for those that are political in nature, which you've seen the opposition addressing, and that is positions in government which are not necessarily beneficial to the average man.
Okay.
But I hope we can go through them and then we're able to break them down.
Okay.
Yes.
But are you satisfied with the recommendations?
I'm partly satisfied because, like I've always said, Kwach, Kenyans, maybe the young Kenyans might not be very informed about this, but in the US, in 1861, there was a very important election, the election that brought into play former President Abraham Lincoln. And the guy was elected by largely northern states. He was a Republican candidate. The loser was coming from the south, and because they were dissatisfied with that elections, the members of the southern states took their candidate and went back to a state called Alabama, in a place called Montgomery, and actually saw in their president. And that led to a civil war that ran for 4 years, and we ended up losing over 600,000 people in the US. That decision, that situation drove to a landmark decision that went into the process of reforming the electoral system that led into what you call the electoral votes today. That's why President Trump won this election with, despite having not gotten the popular vote like the way Hillary Clinton had gotten, he was declared president because of how the electoral, what they call electoral votes balance off in political interest within the state. So Kenya, like any other growing democracy, and we've done 60 years now, the Americans have done 240 years going up, but like any other democracies are growing democracies, so Kenyans are advised, I'm always proposing that people are able to sit so that they're able to discuss and solve their issues, and this National Dialogue Committee was not an exception. Yes.
Okay, it's quite interesting, but you have mentioned that when the National Dialogue Committee, and of course it's a known it's a known fact that when they sat down, there was actually issues that had triggered them to sit down and discuss.
Yeah.
And one of these issues was on the cost of living.
Yeah.
Another one, pertinently, was the two-third gender rule,
Yes.
which they had also agreed to talk about.
Yeah.
There was also the issue of national unity and the governance,
Yeah.
then the checks and the balances.
Yes.
From where you sit,
Yeah.
as I had asked you,
Yeah.
do you think that the report has actually has given a clear blueprint of how this is going to be solved, and we have a better structure generally?
What they've done, you know, what the committee has done is that it has created, it's partially addressed some of the concerns, which, like I mentioned, come from different versions. But there's what was coming from the politicians who had their own political interests. There's what was presented from interest groups, like you've mentioned, the Gender Commission and other civil societies, and also regular Kenyans who had proposals on how to cut the cost of running government. All these are part of a process that has been laid down through Parliament. Remember, this dialogue committee was actually verified and approved by Parliament. So the report has to go back to Parliament to, I think, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, which then has to look at some of the proposals that they have, some of the proposals that the committee has come up with, which then has to go through a public process, what you call a public participation, so that Kenyans can again vote whether or not the decisions, some of the issues that have been singled out as the priority areas, truly reflect the wish of the people, which then has to come back into Parliament, and those ones that need legislation, like as expected, because some of these structures, some of these proposals have to be anchored on law. So it's a whole process that probably might take a year and a half because of members of Parliament, probably next week, when in the next 2 weeks are going on recess. They might come back, say in February, something like that. Then the report is then received by the Justice and Legal Affairs Commission, which then has to go through a public participation process, which then might take a couple of months. And after that, and once it's voted for by Parliament, then the individual issues, as you're mentioning, probably amendments to the gender bill and a few other amendments to some of the state institutions, IBC reforms. It means there has to be amendment of the IBC Act to be able to capture some of the proposals that have been made. All these issues have to then take another 6-month process, because these are bills that have to be presented in Parliament and the Senate, which is a very long process. So we might have 1.5 years to go. Kenyans have time, as you mentioned, including myself, to be able to vet this and see whether or not it's really benefiting the local person, because the reason why people went on the streets was largely not to cater for political interests, but it was because there was an outcry of what happens to the average man, because the cost of food has gone high, the cost of rent has gone high, the cost of fuel has gone high, the cost of housing has gone very high, and also we also have the cost of fuel as well, you know, all these issues, cost of education, and that's what I was missing out, because we have about 5 important things that an average Kenyan is concerned with. Those are the 5 things, and when you look back and look at the report, none of the issues truly captures some of those issues. So from a regular person's perspective, you might probably say the report hasn't quite lived to the expectations of the people.
Okay, interesting. Yes. But of course, even Raila, who is also a major political player in the country, has an opinion, and he says that this report is quite imperfect and unfinished, but a good start. Yeah. Is it a good start to where?
It is a good start, because every time Kenyans get an opportunity, remember, Kwach, you're coming from a very long history of some of what you call high moments and also very low moments. The 2007 election, because Kenyans did not opt to dialogue and create a platform where they're able to talk and agree to disagree on some of the issues that are affecting them, is what led to the war that we had and the fallout that we had in 2007 and ended up losing thousands of Kenyans. So this dialogue was always an option, and I think Raila Odinga, as a leader, a respected leader in the country, is actually honest with himself. He said some of the issues that are being proposed there, we have some very good proposals on the restructuring of IBC. IBC is an animal that I've always said they must be tamed, or else every time IBC makes a mistake, Kenyans lose lives. So it's one of those commissions, it's one of those government institutions that we must always pay attention to. And they have some of the reforms that are, some of the proposals that I have about restructuring of IBC are highly welcomed, as well as those from the Gender Commission. So indeed it's true. Indeed it's true the way as to how Honorable Odinga's reaction is what I support, is that indeed there are some proposals which are very positive, but there's a whole lot to be desired because we haven't quite captured what truly affects an average Kenyan.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. But you've also mentioned that there are terms that actually both Kenya Kwanza and Azimio have come to agree on.
Yeah.
And that is, for the example, electoral justice and the restructuring of IBC.
Yes.
But generally, how will this impact Kenya's political landscape?
It has a huge ramification of how because it has a huge ramifications on how the Kenyan politics is done, because when you restructure the IBC and the electoral process, it means also our electoral form. Remember, one of the proposals that they have is the creation of an office of the Prime Minister, right? Which is currently not captured within our constitution, right? We don't have an existing Prime Minister, neither do we have an office of the official opposition leader, because we already have a minority leader in government who's actually part of government, has a well-funded office with the extra security and a pampered office. A leader of minority is not a regular member of parliament. He actually enjoys the same benefits just like the leader of majority. So some of these proposals, you cannot implement them without going through legal reforms, and also sadly, not sadly, but you know, a must that we have to go to, especially when it comes to changing structure of government. It also has to go through a public forum, which is the referendum. So all these proposals that have been put in place have serious ramifications on how we do our politics, because then the issue of power play comes into play. You have the current structure of government acknowledges that the president is the head of government, then you have a deputy president, and then the third in command, as they like to say, the Speaker of the National Assembly, comes into play. But now with the Prime Minister in that particular space, it means then now the executive expands, and then you have a Prime Minister who comes in now as a third in command, as you may probably I'd like to put it, followed by then the Speaker of National Assembly, and later the head of the judiciary. Yes.
You look at some of these issues that actually they talked about, and particularly on electoral justice, the general reforms about on IBC, they moved from 7 commissioners to 9 commissioners.
Yes.
How do you think this will even impact? It's just having the numbers, different numbers, before we talk about maybe about referendum or not, because actually they alluded to it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think looking at the history of IBC and how it's been the last few years, and also how the challenges it's faced when managing elections, Kwachu has a very serious situation where there's a fallout between commissioners who are about to make a very decisive decision on the lives of Kenyans. I've told you, every time IBC makes a mistake, it costs Kenyans both money and lives. So it's one of those institutions that you can't play with. And then we had an open fallout within the commission. So when you hear such a proposal, and part of it is that they want to expand the mandate of the commission, because as it's structured right now, then the chairman of the commission is the alpha commissioner, leaving out the other commissioners. And when you look at some of the complaints that were actually raised by the core commissioners that were in this particular election, and even in the 2017 election, where you had Roslyn Akombe fleeing because he was saying she wasn't agreeing with some of the decisions which are being passed within the commission. And she actually expressly indicated that within the commission there was a divide. There was a bunch of commissioners that would only come to vote for certain issues, because on the plenary of the commission, decisions are presented, but then you have a very small clique of commissioners that are passing decisions, so it's very easy to be outnumbers in terms of votes. So part of the reason why they wanted it expanded and also part of the proposals that part of the proposals that I want to put into amendment is one that brings into play a situation where that then you have commissioners who have a bigger stake, who are widely, there's a huge number of people that are able to make very key decisions and also expand the mandate of the commissioners. So such decisions are very serious ramifications on how we do our politics going forward. Yes.
But we've had this conversation about electoral reforms for quite a number of times. It is not the first time. Several times, from 2007, after post-election violence, we have had this conversation. After 2013, there was this conversation. 2017, 2018, after the handshake, this conversation was there. What has lacked in our systems or among the political class generally that has made us not to achieve what we have desired?
It's just complete lack of goodwill to have a fair system because of those that are in government. Remember, we are yet to have a regime change since independence, because those who were in play at independence were the same ones who took over post-independence and post-multi-party politics is the same players. So they might not want to have a structured system that is fair based on from where I sit. But then I must admit that the IBC, the ECK of 2007 is not the IBC of today. The policies and the policies and structures, the structures of management of elections that were there in 2007 is not what you have now. You know, now the commission is well structured. The process of administering the elections has also been restructured. Remember, today when you run a presidential election, election vote, there's a major decision that was done by the Supreme Court, which then placed the verdict of the voter, the verdict and the value of the vote to be that vote which has been casted at the polling station, and which then made a de facto order that the vote that counts is the vote that is casted at the local level. And then now we are the structure of how presidential elections are managed. That's why they say results, presidential results are declared at the constituency level. So usually you're able to compile the 290 constituencies. That's why Chairman Chebukati, never mind the back and forth that he has with the opposition and some of the people that do not quite support him. He was very right when he kept telling people that there are no results at Bomas because results are declared at the constituency level, which is where you get the final results. So I think the IBC keeps improving on how it's doing its work. We just now need to get sincere and honest people that want to see that Kenyans have a fair system and make a decisive decisions on the leaders that they want to choose.
Do you think that our system is infiltrated?
Our system is fully infiltrated because IBC, and this came out when we had when you had the fallout in these 2022 elections. Those who got an opportunity to actually sit with the commissioners. One of the commissioners is an old friend of mine, Cherera. We grew up with her in Mombasa. She's an old friend of mine. I've had a chat with her. I can tell you, and she's admitted it multiple times, that the commission was split because we have a lot of interest within the commission. And then some of the players within the commission are serving certain political interests. And this cuts across, not just those that support government, but also there are those that support the opposition. So I don't know how Kenyans are going to probably inculcate a new culture, because what you have is a bad political culture where leadership has to be attained at all costs. You know, that's some of the reasons as to why we then have a gap of integrity within the commission, because I've always argued that the legal structure and provisions that the IBC has are enough to deliver a fair and credible process. But then you have an integrity problem, which then can only be cured by new civic education and culture and getting people into that system. People that are willing to see a free and fair process. We've seen presidents lose. For the first time in Africa, we are seeing presidents lose elections. We had President Goodluck Jonathan losing in Nigeria, President Mutharika losing in Malawi. We had President Edgar Lungu losing in Zambia. You know, big countries like Nigeria, where you would not imagine a president can lose an election. Presidents are losing elections. Just this week, President George Weah has lost in Liberia. So it's possible now to defeat a president, but only if we have systems and structures which then allow Kenyans' verdict to be able to be fair. Yeah.
So do you think we're headed somewhere?
We are headed somewhere because that's why I've explained that the ECK that was there in 2007, and then it was followed by IEBC, the interim independent and
Electoral Boundaries
Commission that was there before. Then of course IEBC. When you look at how the policies and the legal provisions that were there as to how elections are being managed in 2007 are not the same as to how they're being currently done. And I gave an example of the presidential elections. Back then, Samuel Kivuitu did not have to collect and declare results at the local level. You could just assemble results and declare, and you go swear yourselves in the way they did for the late President Kibaki. May his soul rest in peace. But now, we have a presidential electoral system which requires that the results are final at the polling station. 2, the results must be declared at the constituency level. And 3, that all results must declared at the tallying center to completion before a final declaration is done, and the president must be sworn in broad daylight, my brother Kwach, in broad daylight. Okay. So that those are some of the things that were not there before, so we can give props to it. We are heading there.
Okay. Yeah. But do you think that addition, for example, of the IBC, we talk about restructuring of the IBC, so it will even mean that the commissioners will be increased, like for this instance, increasing 7 to 9. How will it generally impact? Because according to how you speak,
yes,
the major issue that is actually facing us is the issue of integrity. So how will this solve
when you
the problem?
when you expand the number of people that sit on the table to make a decision, it also increases accountability, because then it becomes very difficult to have commissioners who make solitary decisions. Remember, there was even a provision that we actually have electoral commissioners from every county, so that the panel of the commissioners to be 47, so that when you make an important decision like that one of declaring who's the winner of the presidency is not something that that can just be done by a chairman alone. Remember, the current legal provision, they only give the mandate to the chairman of IBC to be the person that declares the winner of the president, even when probably outrightly there could be challenges as to how the election results have been assembled, but he has exclusive mandate, which is when if you've been following some of the proposals at the National Dialogue Committee, is that we need to redistribute that mandate, so that before the presidential results are declared, there's a panel vote that must happen at the commissioners level, so that to indicate that these are valid results that we can give to the Kenyan people, as opposed to just having the current exclusive mandate to the chairman of IBC to declare the winner of the presidency. And again, they've also expanded. Remember, they say that for you to be a chairman of IBC, you must also be a lawyer who has served at least 15 years. So they want to also ensure that in the recruitment process, there's also another person that can actually declare the results among the commissioners, who must also meet the same qualifications. So part of their scouting, I believe, for this selection panel that will come in to now select new commissioners, we might have now also a vice chair who probably is a woman, or of a different gender from what the chairman would be. Just if it happens that the chairman of IBC would be a woman, then the deputy must be a man. Must also meet the same qualification threshold, so that then in the absence of a chairman, another commissioner can be able to do that, just to avoid a possibility in the future of us getting into a constitutional crisis. Can you imagine that as it stands today, that only the chairman of IBC can declare a president? What if the chairman of IBC is unable to do that, becomes mentally sick, or passes away, genuinely, probably for valid reasons? Then it means we do not have nobody in the commission that can legally declare the winner of a presidency. So those are some of the proposals that have been passed forward, and I believe it's part of what I'm saying, the progressive reforms that we need to have of the IBC, and also just our entire electoral process. Yeah.
Quite interesting. But what the proposals that actually you're talking about, they will need to go through a referendum.
Not all of them. Not all of them. Where we are required to go through a referendum process is where, in a situation where we have provisions that are actually altering the structure of government. Like now, the proposal to have a prime minister and office of the opposition, the leader of opposition. We do not have any such provisions within our constitution, right? So for you to be able to achieve that, then you have to restructure, you have to go back to the constitution and change the structure of government, so that then you're able to indicate, you're able to capture, properly where then does the prime minister fall in terms of the power hierarchy, because as it stands now, I've explained that government has three institutions, which is the executive, that has the president and the deputy president, and then we also have the National Assembly, which is being headed by the speaker, and the chief justice, who's the head of judiciary. So in terms of power hierarchy, then you have the president, the deputy president, the speaker of National Assembly, then in the absence of the three, then you have the chief justice, who can actually lead the country into the next election, I guess they say within 90 days. So if you bring in the issue of a prime minister who also have constitutional powers, it means you're bringing in a new element within that hierarchy, which has to be recaptured by the people. So such a situation, you have to go back to the people, which then demands that we go through a referendum. But there are other provisions, which then, like the gender, the one on the issue on gender, and a few other, the issue of IBC reforms, those ones can just go through parliamentary amendments, and you don't have to go through a referendum.
Okay, you've talked about you've mentioned some critical beat there of all these issues that we're discussing on the National Dialogue Committee's proposal, and that is actually on the stance on the opposition leader, and of course also the creation of the office of the Prime Minister. And the question is, because the former Prime Minister has actually intimated or alluded of them wanting to take this to the referendum, do you think that it should be taken to the referendum to create the office of the official opposition leader and now the office of the prime cabinet secretary?
You see, my brother Kwach, Kenyans were not stupid when they chose and put options to have a referendum in the constitution. It's a legal process. A referendum is not a personal choice. They say the constitution gives a provision that 1 million of us can collect signatures and petition and issue to the electoral commission, and then we go back to a referendum. So that is, first of all, the referendum is not a Raila Odinga thing. It's a national process. It's something that you can go through as a people, with or without Raila Odinga. But in his opinion, he was alluding to the specific issues that actually interest him. He's a politician. Right, so part of some of the provisions, which include changing the structure of government, it's of interest of him, and it was just a by the way statement of what he had given as his feedback from the report of the National Dialogue Committee, and then he's very right, because any provision that includes changing structure of government, you have to go through a referendum. However, I highly doubt that this current president would want to go through a referendum, because at this particular time, when 80% of Kenyans are struggling to eat, are struggling to pay their house, they're struggling to pay for fuel, as well as pay for their education and medicine, this is probably not the right time for a referendum. And in any case, if you have to have a referendum, you can imagine, I've already indicated to you, that when this National Dialogue Committee was passed by Parliament and validated by Parliament, it became a legal process, which then has to go through Parliament again for the report, which has to go to the Justice and Legal Committee. Is a process that's going to take at least 18 months when you look at it. Okay. Now, by the time we do 18 months from today, my brother Kwach, we'll be talking of 2025 July. And then now you talk issue of budgeting. 2025 July is when IEBC will be seeking budget to do the national elections, because then you only have 2 financial budgets. They have to do civic education. Some of the provisions that have been proposed to the IEBC is that if there's to be any legal restructuring and civil civil education about voter registration and things like that, you have to do it at least 2 years before an election. I highly doubt this president would want to go to a referendum, even though it is indeed true and legally required that for you to do such structural changes, you have to go to a referendum. There's no other alternative.
Thank you so much, sir. We are taking a very quick short break. To the bond before is our SMS line, and of course continue connecting with us at GBS TV Africa, at Dr. Kwach, and please stay with us.
My name is Imagatoru. I'm a model, a commercial model to be precise. And I've been asked this question, like, is model an art? And yes, modeling is an art. Because there are different products that you're supposed to promote or design, and you have to have that skill of you promoting that design or that product. So how you walk, how you talk, how you present yourself, like how you pose for a picture or pose for an item in your mepewa, or how you drive into a place in your mepewa. So you have to have that art or that skill for you to actually deliver what they want you to deliver. So yeah, modeling is an art.
I want us to go to the Word of God, the book of Isaiah, and then we continue. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 38, whatever we have read is just a story, a true story of a man of God. And a man of God that has walked before God, where there is no hope. I don't know whether you have reached a position whereby you don't know from here, who should I go to? But my topic today is that there is hope in God.
Everywhere, GBS.
Thank you so much, and welcome back to The Insight as we continue with this conversation, a comprehensive conversation actually on the report that is quite pivotal in shaping Kenya's political future.
Yes.
And of course, we are continuing this conversation. The next question, because Raila is talking about the creation of the office of the opposition leader and prime minister.
Yes.
Of course, this to be taken now for a referendum.
Yeah.
But the question is, the creation of the office of the of opposition leader has been a conversation that we have been having for quite a while. The president has also intimated on him wanting this to happen quite a number of times. But the question is, how will this affect in our political landscape, creating the official office of the opposition leader? Will it maybe solve the issue of discontentment amongst the political class, like we have always seen in the previous years? Or generally, how will it improve our political landscape?
Coach, we already have a leader of opposition in parliament. A fully funded office of the leader of minority with a team and staff that actually is mandated to whip the opposition, to be able to oversee the national executive. So we already have that. Maybe we would have maybe the debate that we'll be having is how do you build the capacity of that office so that they can be able to compete. I'll explain something, Kwach. You know, if you grew up with some friends and then you grew up and became adults, you started working and probably, you know, get to have families and then raise families, you become what you call peers. And so your peers can be able to engage you and answer you. But then when you have somebody that probably is not within your peers, you might not be able to respond to him as to the way you would respond to people that you consider your peers. So the challenge is a political challenge and not a legal challenge. Because we already have a leader of opposition, like I've explained, and the same structure is captured even at the county levels. You know, that's why within the county assemblies, we also have the leaders of majority and the leaders of minority. And their job are very clear, that those who are in executive, they're managing government and they're managing the resources and the people. And those who are in a minority, their job is to oversight that government so that they're able to do checks and balances on how they're managing the affairs of the public. What you're dealing with here is now a political situation, where now what you look at the stature, for example, the leader of minority, the leader of minority currently, Opiyo Wandayi, you would not consider him a peer to President William Ruto, even though he has the legal mandate to actually be able to oversight government. How he's respected and listened to by the members of opposition might not be how probably the Honorable Raila Odinga does. So it's an issue of stature. That's why now President William Ruto might consider Raila Odinga his peer as opposed to, say, Opiyo Wandayi. So probably that's what we are trying to solve, and also the capacity of that particular office. Because remember, it's not just the opposition it's not just a provision of office of the opposition leader. It actually comes with 2 deputy opposition leaders and then what you call a shadow cabinet that is oversighted by government, which also almost mirrors the executive. Then we're talking about 22 shadow cabinet, because we have 22 cabinet ministers. You know, so it's a whole structure which could easily be achieved by you know, just restructuring the office of the minority leader. But because of political stature, because then you have a candidate that loses an election but is outside parliament, who is supposed to play oversight role but is not captured legally. So probably that's what we're looking at. Probably we could have easily created a bill that, you know, sort of addresses the issue of the minority leader and how you can give capacity to that particular office so that we're able to capture that. So it's probably the issue of, it's more of politics than the legal position, because we already have a leader of opposition, even as we speak in the current format.
When you say the leader of the minority
Yes.
is akin to the leader of the opposition,
Yes.
what do you mean that the leader of majority is like the president of Kenya?
And that's what I'm saying. So when you look at it legally, is that he is the de facto leader of the minority in parliament.
No, I mean when you say that, yes.
And that's what I'm trying to explain. As a leader of minority then, it means he's leading the minority forces within the parliament.
Within
right?
the parliament.
Yeah, and within government, because then leader of majority comes from a party that came second in the political election. It means what you're representing. Opiyo Wandayi is representing the 6.9 or 6.8 million people that voted for the opposition leader. And the others, remember there were 2-3 other candidates as well on the ballot, and all of them are considered as minority. So his opinion is a verdict of the opposition. Only that now I was trying to say that maybe we did address the issue of stature, because in terms of peers, you wouldn't consider Opiyo Wandayi as a peer to President William Ruto. But Honorable Raila Odinga, who came second, then becomes a peer and is able to actually face the president and address him. So that could have been addressed by probably restructuring that office of the minority leader, because remember, he currently, the leader of minority must be a member of parliament.
Okay.
But then if you can be able to have a provision, a legal provision that now makes the leader of that now makes that office of the minority leader to be open to either an elected or an unelected leader, then that would automatically bring into play the presidential candidate who's actually sitting outside currently. So I agree with the provision that we need to give capacity to that particular office so that then you're able to compete with the sitting executive. The president gets a budget of almost 3.6 trillion, but the person who comes second does not even have a shilling on his name, is a civilian. So it's a good provision, but then we need to see how we balance it off with the leader of minority in parliament.
But actually, you've not answered my question.
Yes.
You think that if we create the office of the opposition leader,
Yes.
because we have had a very bad political manners,
Yes.
whereby we always have to fight after every other election by complaining. It's always discontentment. It's always a time for election. It's always a time where we are in mixed reactions. We do not know what will happen next.
Yes.
Businesses comes to an halt.
Yeah.
Now there's just generally discontentment.
Yeah.
Whoever becomes the president, the other party will say that they did not win fairly.
Yeah.
Now the question is, will this be solved? And then will we then continue without these little issues that actually has been affected?
It does. It does, because it gives a fallback. Currently, the person that loses election goes home, right? When you create an office of opposition leader and then have these shadow cabinet ministers and they are fully financed by government, it gives capacity. There's something to fall for. And you know, it's not just the leader of opposition. This president can lose election and also he's also looking for a fallback, because if he loses, he has to go home.
Yes.
But if you create this office, it means this president will be around, fully funded by taxpayers' money. So I agree with you. It actually does give a fallback for whoever is trying to do it, and then that helps us in terms of easing tensions. One of the biggest challenges that we have is that we have a losers, what do you call it? A winner take all type of a system, which then now makes somebody. It makes this electoral competition become a cutthroat process. So when we create this office of the leader of opposition, it does give us something to fall back on. So it's good for easing up the political tension.
There's a question I've wanted to ask, actually, about Kenya's political structure, or rather the governance structure. Whether it is presidential, is it parliamentary? Because I think we are working in a political space, which is quite a bit confused, or rather we do not know what exactly is happening in so many ways.
Yeah, what we have is a presidential system. When we were, just before we went into the 2010 constitution, and I remember that time I was in a law firm somewhere, and we were part of the people who had presentations. We did make some proposals as a young people to that panel of, they were calling it Committee of Experts, that was being led by Kuro Court and Kamodho Iganjo and the guys that were sitting on that particular panel. And at that particular time, our proposal is that we transition the country into a parliamentary system, which means then Kenyans elect members of parliament, and then the party that wins the majority of the seats forms government. What happens in the UK and some of the other countries in Europe that have a parliamentary system that elect a prime minister, and the prime minister becomes the leader of government, is that then there's a threshold of what makes a win. So for example, in the context of Kenya, we have 290 constituencies. So they say half of that is about 145 members of parliament. So they say that if on the first vote, the person who wins the election gets the 145 seats, then he expressly forms government, he becomes the winner. But then they also set a threshold, just in case if he doesn't make it, he has a period of time, they say maybe 30 days, to form a coalition, which is what happens in Germany. And Angela Merkel did that because she won an election, but she didn't win the substantive number of members of parliament that she needed to become the chancellor of Germany. Then they give you 30 days to look around some of the other competitors and form a coalition, which then must be validated by the Electoral Commission and you form government. But failure too, then you have within 90 days to go back to the ballot. You know, that is part of how the parliamentary system works, because then Kenyans do not choose. Such a provision would mean that Kenyans do not choose directly their president, but they choose members of parliament. Something that we've been proposing because we had our own independent reasons as to why we wanted to do that. We wanted to really take care of this issue of tribalism, because as it stands now, we have a challenge of what we call ethnic majoritarianism within our political system, which is what his name was Mtai who, the political analyst, he used to call it tyranny of numbers, that one community, 6 million Luyas and 4 million Luos and probably 4 million Kambas can come together and say we have 15 million votes. And yet Kenya is actually a country of about 44, 45 communities. They all have equal representation. And part of the reasons as to why we've had some very controversial elections is because of that. You know, you have a government that does not represent the face of the people, and then you have communities which are excluded from, particularly the people that come from the Western region like us. We've largely been in opposition purely out of ethnic exclusion, you know, and that's why we had a massive fallout in 2007, and part of the agenda 4 issues that were being discussed at Serena was that then how do we address equitable representation in the national government, and then secondly, how then do we address equitable sharing of resources, which is what brought in the devolution. So at least today, there is no county in this particular country that can say that it has been fully excluded from government, something that those who wanted to run the ethnic majoritarianism mandate are struggling with. Had it been in the previous section, there's some section of this country who wouldn't be seeing development. So, yes, I think it's important that we address the issue of inclusivity, and part of which is what we're addressing issues of creating office of the opposition leader and things like that. Yes.
You've mentioned about the parliamentary system,
yeah,
and the presidential system.
Yes.
Because I look at these countries that actually have got presidential parliamentary systems.
Yes.
And they're quite not chaotic as ours has always been.
Yeah.
And that will ask me, that will even beg the question, that do you think it is better than what we have?
It is better. It is what we are proposing. It is one of the solutions towards us having peaceful elections, because parliamentary system, what it does, it cushions Kenyans from being part of the political chaos every now and then, and also it kills what you call emotive elections. The UK has now had 5 prime ministers in less than 5 years. They had Prime Minister David Cameron, who came in, who followed by Boris Johnson. They had Theresa May, they had Liz Truss. Now we have the Indian guy. 5 prime ministers, yet there's no chaos in that particular election. That is what is actually being practiced in South Africa. And what it does over a period of time is that it brings in a political culture system where it kills the whole idea of what you call the tyranny of numbers. You know, we have a constituency here called Ruiru. It has almost 100,000 voters. And again, we have a constituency in West Pokot South, which has just about 30,000 registered voters. In a parliamentary system, Pokots would never form government. No, sorry, in a presidential system, Pokots would never form government because of tyranny of numbers. Because however times we repeat the election, there will always be 30,000 Pokots and 100,000 Kikuyus, say, in Ruiru. But in a parliamentary system, is that 100,000 people can vote for a particular political party in Ruiru, but 10 Pokots in Pokot South can as well elect a president. It brings in the fair justice system that we now have in the US, and I gave you the reasons as to how the American political system was driven into the electoral problem, because the state of California, my brother Kwach, has 30 million people. The state of New York has about 25 million people. And then a state of Illinois, which has Chicago, those are the 3 big cities, which is New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, has 25 million people. So 3 states already have 75 million people. Most of those, and most of those 3 states are largely what you call the blue states, the Democrats. That means every time there's an election, the Democratic candidate would always have a 75 million head start before he even goes to the other 47 states. That's why they had to cure that, because it came out of a civil war. And I believe that we as Kenyans, we need to pursue that as an option, so that then we can look at some of the benefits of having a parliamentary system. A parliamentary system that can be able to give us leaders largely based on their capacities to lead, and not ethnic arithmetics, because that's why in countries like Tanzania, this has worked very well in Tanzania and South Africa. The current president of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, comes from a very small community called the Venda. They're hardly 10% of what the Zulus and the Xhosas are. And before that, there was a president who was a Zulu president, which is Jacob Zuma, who was actually kicked out of office midway. He didn't finish his term, but still, you know, there was nothing like Zulus are leaving ANC. That's what happened in Tanzania. The late President Magufuli, who comes from a very the biggest community in Tanzania, which is the Sukumas, was the first president in Tanzania to come from a majority community. President Kikwete came from a very small community in a place called Bagamoyo, a very small Swahili community. If Tanzanians were so much stuck into the presidential system that is largely tribal and that's largely fueled by tribal antagonism, people like President Kikwete would have never been presidents in Tanzania. I pray that Kenyans currently and in the years to come can consider some of these, the parliamentary system as one of those options that can be able to cure cutthroat politics and probably kill tribalism in the process of electing our leaders.
Thank you so much. You've mentioned very, very critical issues.
Yeah.
But again, when we wanted to cure this issue or this disease of tribalism, then the counties were involved. And actually, it is also in the report, which is recommending transferring devolved function and resources to county government. Those who were structuring the constitution thought that this would actually see or cure some of the chaos that were within Kenya, because actually we will have counties, devolved functions will be given to them, there'll be resources that will be devolved generally. Now, from where you sit, do you think that the counties, or rather the devolution, has achieved majorly its intention? And what are generally the challenges that actually we continue to face that are even making now the presidency still a hot cake, regardless?
It is quite part of the reason, part of the issue, three things. One, the 2010 Constitution is supposed to address two major things. Equitable representation in the national government. That means the face of Kenya. Whether or not we have funds in the counties, the national government belongs to the people of Kenya, and that means all the 45 communities that we have in the country. That was one. Two, it was equitable access of resources to all Kenyans, which is where devolution comes in. What is very sad, 10 years after, 10 years after the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution, having a president who served 10 years, is that shortly after the the passing of the 2010 Constitution, there was something that was formed called the Transitional Authority, which was an institution that was supposed to, within 2 years, to be able to value the functions, and then immediately after the 2013 elections, transfer all the functions to the counties with all the funding that the government requires. It's very sad that 10 years later, we still have a president and a government who are still debating on how we're going to value functions and then be able to transfer funds. This is what is supposed to be done in 2013. And you saw a very sad story in Turkana, where despite Turkana having received 100 billion shillings in the last 10 years, we still had the county struggling. They're still struggling to even build just the governor's office of the governor, which has currently costed the taxpayers' money 206 million. And they're saying they need 90 million shillings more to finish that structure on a very small plot in an area where an acre of land costs us about 100,000 shillings. The provisions of devolutions are clear. The funding and as to how it was supposed to implement it is clear. What we've lacked is the goodwill, because I've told you we have guys who've been in the system for a very long time who have not shown the goodwill to fully devolve functions so that then we can end the debate of cutthroat competition in terms of presidential elections, because part of the reason is that people felt that when you lose an election, then your region was not going to get development. I'm very happy that even with that, the failures to completely devolve some of the functions, we've gained tractions, because when I was in Kisumu, when President William Ruto was declared president, and some of my friends in Kisumu, though disappointed that they'd lost elections, but one of them was happy to say that, we might have lost the election, but at least we have a county government. So we are now banking on Governor Nyong'o to be able, as a fallback, we can as well get our funds and mind our business. So it's given a soft landing to politicians, and which is part of the cure that we need to end that cutthroat politics. But I hope this president or any other president, the president that would fully devolve, would support devolution as it was written in the Constitution, would be the person who will fully cure the issue of us having cutthroat political competition.
Thank you so much. Let's talk about the hits and the misses of the National Dialogues Committee's report. What are the hits? Let's start with the hits, generally, from where you sit.
The IBC reforms, the provisions that we are, some of the things that have been proposed to restructure IBC and also expand the mandate of the commissioners within the IBC and all that, because they're very critical. Even though we have an election only once in every 5 years, but it has a bearing as to how the country runs, because they always say just a year before election and a year after election, we always have nothing going on. So part of the solutions that are being given to cure that is are the provisions that are being proposed on reforms of that. We have some provisions on the Gender Commission. How many people, how do we then make sure we maximize representation? Because a lot of people think that when you talk about gender inclusivity is just about women, but you have situations where Nakuru County has a woman governor, a woman senator, a woman rep, and 5 members of parliament who are women.
Yes.
Is one of those counties that actually has been excessively represented by women. So gender representation cuts across, and they have some very good positions on that, on the issues of gender. And then they have some provisions on the tax rebates to cut down some of the tax provisions that this current bill, the current financial act now, because it was a bill and it was signed by the president, is now an act to sort of cut down on some of those tax provisions. One of the proposition is to revert back the VAT on fuel from 16% to 8%, which is a sort of a win with that. But a bunch of other things as well. I think they also, I don't know, I keep forgetting. There's a couple of 2-3 other provisions as well. When you look at them, they have an impact on the common man, but does not really have a bigger impact because we needed drastic decisions on particularly on the issue of cost of living, because that's what is basic to an average Kenyan.
The missus.
Yeah.
The missus.
It's very unfortunate that the reason why people went to the street was cost of living. And you've had particularly players who, those that are part of the executive, sort of trying to reduce the entire outcry on the cost of government into fertilizer, not knowing that a lot of Kenyans need to know, maybe, and your viewers need to know, that something like fertilizer only forms about 7% of the cost of production. Because after fertilizer, then you have to do the plowing, the harrowing, and the harvesting, storage, and transport to markets. All that attracts also additional costs, and the president hasn't been quite, and then not just on one commodity, which is maize largely, because they like to talk about unga. But quite we don't take unga on a daily basis. We have milk, and we have bread, and we have wheat, and all these things, which is part of the food consumption that we Kenyans consume. So they failed big time to address the main reason as to why people went on the streets and why there was an outcry. It was on cost of living, high taxes, and also a bloated government. Because this president, many people maybe might have not noted it. The first thing this president did was to create an office of the prime minister. And then he ended up expanding the size of the state departments, because originally we had 43 state departments, which are headed by the principal secretary, and pushed them to 51. So that is expanding government by almost 7-8 departments, which means it attracts more expenditure from the exchequer. And he's created a lot of other subcommittees within government. So he's run a bloated government. So 3 major things that people went on the street with. One was cost of living, which then captures, like I said, not just food, but food, housing, education, health, and transport, because transport then we bring in the issue of fuel. So that would have been a big hit, but then it's a big miss, and it's wide. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation. But even as we come to the end of this conversation,
yes,
generally, what do you think are going forward?
Yeah.
Do you think that there is anything much that we are going to achieve with this committee as it is? Yes, the recommendation, yes. But we have always seen whereby there is the lack of political goodwill.
Yeah.
We have seen an example whereby the politicians, for example, have just done things for the sake of, let's just do them so that we have peace. Yeah. Because you have mentioned, for an instance, that for us to have a referendum, it will take like a lot, 18 months.
18 months.
And
probably,
almost, so was this just being done as a political, was it just a political maneuver, or was it quite intentional and deliberate? And one of the reasons we're asking about this is because of now what you're talking about, the cost of living, which has not, there's not yet tangible,
there's no substantive
solution to this critical issue.
Yeah.
So what are we heading anywhere?
Yeah. The motive of the creation of the National Dialogue Committee was good.
Okay.
And the agendas that were actually highlighted there initially were good cost of living, electoral reforms, you know, the things that are very important to Kenyans. But when you look at what has come out of the report, are largely political solutions to political competitors, and nothing that really captures the issue of, nothing that really captures the aspirations of an average Kenyan. An average Kenyan on the streets wants to eat cheaply, live cheaply, pay his education cheaply, have access to medicine cheaply, and be able to fuel their lives, because fuel is not just transport fuel, there's also gas and all other things, and do it cheaply. They wanted to see some of the measures, which are the quick measures that the government and this committee is going to propose for this government, to be able to do them so that they can easily affect them. Probably I would have expected that immediately this president to allow to cut the size of government, because we have a bloated government in a situation where Coach, in 2010, when we passed the 2010 constitution, and we had the 14 functions which are fully devolved, there's over 100 state parastatals that became defunct. One of the quick and easy measures that the government would have done to raise resources was to fully devolve the functions within 6 months. And the president did actually commit to actually fully devolve these functions within 6 months. Now we are going to a year. To devolve these functions and shut down this agency, so that the money that was going into running this, redundant state corporations then would have gone into expanding what they're calling agricultural and food production and industrialization. That hasn't quite materialized. So I don't know. I do not expect. Best looking at what the report has given us, there's actually nothing substantive to benefit Kenyans, and I really doubt if it's going to amount into anything. In any case, when you bring in the issues of a referendum, I do not believe that this president is willing to face any referendum at this particular time when we have almost 30 million Kenyans starving. So it's tragic because taxpayers' money have been spent. We've spent almost 300 million shillings just on what Kalonzo and Kimani Ichung'wah have been doing, and unfortunately nothing beneficial has come out of it. Yes.
Thank you so much. We are coming to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for that insightful conversation. But what is your last statement, even as we are closing this?
My brother Kwach, my parting shot has always been that no Kenyan made a mistake by going to the ballot to choose a leader of his own choice, because that's what democracy is. But as patriots and Kenyans who are patriots, we have a duty to always act in the interest of our people, whether or not we voted for this government. We must always, all of us must pray that this government works to the best interest of the public, that this government works to the benefit of every Kenyan, and where it fails to, is the duty of all Kenyans to oversee this government, because currently as it stands, the National Assembly has failed, and only Kenyans can be able to do that. My plea is that Kenyans to rain check this government, otherwise we are heading into turmoil. Yeah.
Thank you so much, George Ngaira, a political analyst, joining us, of course, on The Insight tonight, where we get to delve deeply into issues that concern you every Friday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. This is a very intentional, deliberate conversation, and of course, very comprehensive, just tailored for you to get to understand deeply the current affairs, issues, economy, and issues much, much more that even concern you. On behalf of everyone else who has made this a success, I want to wish you a very good night. See you next Friday. My name is Eugene Ochieng-Kwach.
Everywhere, GBS.
And if it's not the youth service gym na watch nini ingine. So I have an amazing crew with me. Leo ni full house. Majamaa sijui nianze, sijui ni piki ponki ama. Anyway, good news to those who are on a payroll.
Kwa sababu mimi na ukilipa rent alafu utolewe pesa zingine za nyumba, unashindwa zinaenda kwa nyumba gani?
I'm not even talking about Georgina right now, but I'm talking about wewe mwenye unashindilia maisha wenyewe wewe. Ni nini mbaya? What is wrong?